Welcome to the Marshall Pruett podcast, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers and my dearest brother, Graham Goodwin of DailySportsCar.com, as we get into the Weekend Sports Cars episode. Missed you the last week or two, my friend, but also very thankful your young Jedi, Stephen Kilby, could keep the seat warm on my behalf.
It's been fun, but mate, we've missed you. I know there's still a way to go before things get to a kind of regular thing for you guys. Thoughts are obviously with both yourself and Shabral, but yeah, Stephen stepped in.
Great job.
Well, we even had a couple of soapbox rants from Kilby, so I think if anything, he's getting a bit too comfortable.
He's too young. I mean, seriously, you haven't lived enough to have an opinion yet, Kilby. For real? Are you kidding me here? That's reserved for old farts who think they know stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Errantly, usually. All right, pal. So we're going to blast through as many things as we possibly can.
Well, it's only fair, since I've been holding the fort, and it's a big fort. Let's face it, MP. That I
was
get
that
to
a
choose.
Fat joke? That was a fat joke. Good.
No,
we're back to normal. I like that.
No. Offended now. Let's get over that. Right. But my choice is going to be Unser. We're going to throw you straight back in at the deep end, and I'm just going to feed these questions to you like a frenzied gibbon throwing its own feces.
Hashtag frenzied gibbon throwing feces.
Absolutely.
Oh, good Lord. This thing's already crashed, and we're just a few minutes in.
Right then. First one comes from Texan Dan at Texan Hombre, Twitter. I'm guessing he's from Texas. He says, why does Audi seem to do so much better in other series than Unser?
Yeah, I guess I would add to that, Dan, that when we have European teams come over and play with their Audis and Unser, they do astonishingly well. The Land team coming to mind, obviously. I think there's a couple of quick things that stand out immediately. I don't know if all of them hold real weight or gravity, but one, I think usage. That's probably the dumbest thing of all, but usage. I think in many cases, the teams in Europe that have their R8 LMS GT3s tend to use them a lot, tend to be on track a lot. I don't know if I can say the same about all that have used them here in the USA. Secondarily, I've mentioned this before in the podcast, Graham, it is a fact. I know it to be fact because I've heard it from people within the organization saying it's a fact, and it's that, at least on the U.S. side, the customer support engagement has definitely not been level with the vast majority of other manufacturers playing in, if we're talking strictly IMSA, it's GT Daytona category. Also, if we look across in the what we're just going to call World Challenge forever, in their GT class, we know for sure that many of the manufacturers that are routinely finishing ahead of Audi happen to have manufacturers in a Pro-Am class that, while it's not, quote, factory-backed, there are certain incentives that manufacturers offer, and Audi has routinely lost that battle and has just simply not, by measuring what the other manufacturers are offering, whether it is a little bit of money, whether it's time on 7-post shaker rigs, just driver simulators, all the things that would help a team to be more competitive, Audi has not measured up. And I would say that from a European standpoint, I believe they absolutely have. To close this, Graham and our pal Texan Dan, everything I've heard has said it is a unique American shortcoming. The engagement within Audi of America to really go as hard as the other manufacturers in GTD, through finances, through staffing, through expertise, it's not there. The biggest signal of this, who was the person in charge of all this trying to help lend expertise? Brad Kettler, the great Brad Kettler. At the end of 2018, Brad Kettler is no longer involved whatsoever, and that was a decision made by Audi of America. You reap what you sow, guys, and if you are not committed in the ways that you should be, well, here we are with Audi almost not represented in GT in any substantive way. It's unfortunate.
It is that, and lest we thought that it was just Audi amongst the German manufacturers that were bothering our listeners, we've got Adam Smith from Facebook who asked a question about BMW in IMSA. Has BMW said anything about continuing in IMSA? I may have missed it, but are they withdrawing from GTE, GTLM competition altogether?
You and I, Graham, at Sebring, the two of us seem to recall BMW Motorsport boss Jens Marquardt saying, no, IMSA's good. We like IMSA. This does something for us, big market. So, and things we have heard following that as well would certainly suggest that they intend to stay in play. I have not made the time or had the ability to check in as much as I would want on the team side, but this is routinely the portion of the year, Graham and Adam, where these kinds of discussions are held. BMW is notorious, in the USA at least, for doing one-year contracts. And they have a fairly well-known policy of wanting to always put their motorsport contracts up for bid, just from a fair practices standpoint. And this is kind of the phase where that tends to happen. So I've heard nothing about the whole thing's going away. Would also say that coming into 2019, the Rahal Letterman Lanigan team that facilitates BMW's GTLM effort made further and significant investments in personnel to try and make it even stronger and more competitive. So I don't believe any of that would have been done if there was a strong indicator or belief held internally that this whole thing was going away stateside at the end of 2019.
Okay, something a bit different from Matthew Lewis, again from Facebook, asked about part firmate rules in IMSA or WEC. I can certainly comment on WEC. Are there any part firmate rules for IMSA and WEC, and how do those rules compare to F1 or IndyCar? Well, I guess the easiest one to compare is going to be IndyCar and IMSA, MP, because you've had experience of both.
Yeah, I love the question here, Matthew, because when I read it, the first thing that came to mind is, boy, there sure are different rules. Well, more accurately, I won't compare whatever the written rules happen to be, maybe more the established physical practices. In IMSA, there's a really heavy, don't touch it, don't even look at it. Just turn your back and pretend it's not there. IMSA has its rules in qualifying where you cannot touch the car. There was a bit of acrimony. I'm trying to remember whether it was earlier this year or earlier last year, where I think it was, a crew member mistakenly touched the car, tripped, was falling, something, put his hand on the car to keep himself from hitting the ground, and there were real questions as to whether that car's qualifying time might be disallowed. And then there was a bit of sanity that prevailed that no, there was no manipulation of the vehicle. It was just, does the guy do a face plant or try and stop himself? So there's a very real, I would say, strong sense of no touching, no manipulation, period. IndyCar, same thing, just not as staunch. So there's everyone knows you're not supposed to, and you're not supposed to mess with it, but I can tell you that, it's a little more laissez-faire in how it is practiced in reality compared to by the letter. So very drastic differences between the two. And just as a quick sidebar, on the IndyCar side, not saying that their technical staff and whatnot are any less robust than IMSA's or the WEC's, but there are times I've noticed, say in Victory Lane, where the celebration's going on, and there's someone standing next to each car, where I'm pretty well convinced that the person tending to the car from the series, Graham, should not also be looking up, watching the Victory Lane celebrations. Again, I'm not saying it always happens. I just have noticed, as someone who often shoots photos in Victory Lane to use for whatever thing that I'm filing, I think I could probably reach over and do something and no one would notice. And if I could do that, then boy, someone else could too. So yeah, definitely a difference here, Matthew.
Matt Niedert, Facebook, says Scott Atherton will be giving the annual State of the Series presentation later this week. Last year, there was big changes like the prototype class split, the GTD Sprint Cup. He says probably no such large changes for 2020, but any rumours of pending announcements before the 2020 schedule coming later this week? Or is there anything you're hoping to hear Scott mention in the way of changes?
Well, we can unveil a hashtag breaking exclusive scoop here.
No.
On the Week in Sports Cars. Yes, we do. Yes, we are the global authority on sports cars or something. I don't know, or not. A global authority on condiments and hot dogs. We're going to have there's going to be a dedicated LMP2 class for the Riley Multimatic Mark 30. Unfortunately, There's only one car entered, but I hear there's great potential. Matt, I think set your expectations a little bit low in terms of big bombshell, fun, interesting stuff. Rumors of what I've heard might be coming in the announcements. I think we're going to just get a little bit more clarity on DPI 2.0. I think anybody would expect that to be part of the major annual address from Scott Atherton. I think, and this would just be another practical thing that almost anybody would be surprised if it isn't heard, owing to the car count problems that IMSA has had with spinning off LMP2 into its own category. I've heard no rumblings of LMP2 being folded back into DPI, going to a unified prototype class and doing the whole performance balancing thing between disparate types of prototypes that never worked. I've heard nothing about that. I think, though, I'd be surprised, and I think collectively would be surprised, if there wasn't something, Matt, that said, hey, yeah, the car counts aren't that big, costs are maybe part of it, competition's maybe part of it. What if we were to think more GTD Sprint Cup with LMP2 and do some sort of shorter schedule that, hey, you can come out and play whenever you want, but let's really try and concentrate championship-wise. Maybe something that's a little more cost-effective. Maybe that will help stoke interest in folks using whatever number of unused LMP2 cars are here now. I mean, I know United Autosports cars are sitting in Florida, or actually, I believe Indianapolis, but regardless, they're sitting in the U.S. doing nothing right now. There's certainly other P2 chassis doing nothing right now. Could that be the thing that helps teams like Performance Tech, Pier 1 Matheson, and any others? Maybe JDC Church to get back involved just to put cars on track if the price point is certainly more tolerable. So something in that direction. I don't think, Graham, we're going to hear a ton on the GT side because I can't think of much that would need addressing. So beyond that, I don't think there's a ton coming, Matt. And honestly, that wouldn't be the worst thing. I do know that so we're recording this on a Wednesday morning. It'll go up here in a couple hours, so I can't get into things right now. But there's going to be an interesting announcement tomorrow that is not sports car or IMSA related. But there's going to be a very interesting announcement tomorrow that is going to that is scheduled for tomorrow, that will indeed either have a direct impact or at least have the potential of a significant impact on IMSA here in the coming years. So I wish I could tell you more. I'm under embargo on it, but can just tell you that check out racer.com tomorrow morning, Thursday morning, and go into it as much as I can in that article about how this hashtag breaking exclusive scoop, no, it's not exclusive or a scoop, but on what's coming could actually impact IMSA in a surprising way.
Tires. Doug Bonham from Facebook this time.
Hi, Doug.
He's talking about some material that we've had on both racer.com and dailysportscar.com about Goodyear coming back into the WEC. Great reporting and theorising about Goodyear's return of the WEC and what ripple effects could be felt in years to come. Do you know if there could be moves by any OEMs in GTLM away from Michelin, or the return of a privateer effort a la Falcon Tire in IMSA focused on Goodyear or any other non-Bibendum brand? I can give you a couple of ifs and buts and maybes away from IMSA on that.
Give me your buts, Graham.
Well, here we go. Here's the butt. What a nice butt it is. The main thing here is we're setting ourselves up here for what's already been telegraphed, which is single-make tyre suppliers in every class in the WEC. And the jungle drums appear to be playing a tune that says whoever gets hypercar will also get LP2, and that will lead to a process that means that the competing tyre supplier, always assuming it's still the 2, would therefore get both GTE classes. That could be messed with by the fact that there is a third in the wings at the moment. I'm aware of who that is. I don't think that they've got much of a prayer of actually getting a foot in the door, but we do appear, MP, to be heading down the lines of very much more IMSA-like tyre picture in the WEC, and that is coming simply to help to equalise hypercar.
Where I think this could be interesting, Doug, and I have no intel on whether it would actually happen, just trying to think of American realities here, which are very different from everything that's coming here on the European side with the WEC and Goodyear. In the good old US of A, Dunlop is a non-entity as a brand. So if we look at the Dunlops being refashioned as Goodyears and Goodyear really being the name and brand that will be elevated on the European front, I think that's really, really smart for them. If we look here in the U.S. and what Goodyear does, they were once massive in everything. They were IndyCar, they were IMSA, they were NHRA, and they were NASCAR. I mean, truly, there was a long stretch, honestly, until about 94, 95, when Firestone came in on the IndyCar side. But for the longest time, the majority of my lifetime, I can say for sure that in the USA, motor racing tires equated to Goodyear. That's changed. Firestone's been sole supplier, ran Goodyear off from IndyCar, both kart and IRL, because their tires were that much better. IMSA's obviously been through a lot of changes over the years. Tire manufacturers have come and gone, more or less settled on Michelin as the best, period, which we saw in the American Le Mans Series. Grand Am in a very different place. Names changed. It's more or less the same brand between Hoosier than it was under the Continental brand and such. Interesting, though, Graham, that of all the things here in the USA, knowing that there is this brand shift to the Goodyear name that has just been pillar here in the U.S., I keep wondering, like Doug, could there be something coming in IMSA? I do not believe Goodyear would spend any money to help facilitate a semi-works privateer team like they did with, or like the Falcon Tire program existed. But I am curious, though, because the one place where Goodyear truly stands out today is NASCAR. And so that's the big raging monster of motorsports in the U.S., but we also know that it's no longer as big as it once was. And so part of me wonders, and has been wondering, Doug, especially since Graham in the Daily Sports Car team did an amazing job to bring this Goodyear story to the front, if NASCAR's losing audience every year and its big impact is no longer what it once was, IMSA, by comparison, is still, it's not even recognizable in terms of North American recognition in motor as a sport. But if NASCAR's impact is dialing down, Graham, part of me wonders if maybe it would be wise for Goodyear to consider a GTLM supply offer or something along those lines to actually put its product, as it did decades ago in IMSA, in front of the type of people who would potentially go and actually buy them. I don't know if anybody watching a NASCAR race sees Goodyears and says, gotta have them, but they're certainly there. We know in sports car racing, probably more than any other form of racing, very discerning people are observing the performance coming from whatever it is, a tire, a shock absorber, a whatever, just the vehicle itself, and use what they see to inform highly educated buying decisions. So be interesting to see, Doug, if Goodyear recognizes that, okay, NASCAR is still a thing. It's just maybe not getting us what it once did. Maybe we should go to the heart and soul of people who really do discern between tire brands and show them what we can do today.
Be interesting, won't it, at the end of the multi-year deal that Michelin have actually got, whether or not they've got competition for that deal further down the line. It is certainly interesting to see the Goodyear brand back. Particularly interesting that it's a completely new range of tyres. It is not rebranded Dunlops in the WEC, but a completely new range of tyres. Back to current IMSA grid, and Karen Pires Frederico from Facebook says, with Mazda back-to-back recent success, can we assume they'll be hit with BOP?
They've been bopped, Kevin, yes. As one would expect, I've been impressed here, Graham, with IMSA and their willingness to adhere to the rules they've set out for themselves, which is, one, saying that we're not going to be making knee-jerk reactions through BOP. We actually have a duration of time before we will allow ourselves to make another one, and unless I have completely gotten my calendar wrong, I believe they have adhered to that. Obviously, with Mazda being really, really, really fast and winning the last two races, its first two races since IMSA came back to life in 2014. Yeah, I'm sure the folks at Mazda are saying, come on, man. We want a couple more before you turn off the fun spigot. Hashtag fun spigot. But hashtag me personally, let's just do the rest of the show speaking in hashtags. Hashtag me personally, not a surprise, Kev. Everybody would expect that. If the Nissan On-Road DPI in the hands of the core Autosport team all of a sudden perked up and started winning, two races on the trot, we would probably expect to see the same exact bopped upside the head type maneuver by the series, because that's what BOP is used to do. So, will this end Mazda's glory? I don't know. I can say that of the changes, we would look for the Cadillacs to be a little bit more powerful in their competitive effort. They have been lacking top end for a while now. So at a place like Road America, which they had this weekend, Graham, if you don't have top speed, you don't have nothing. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out for sure. I'd be surprised if the Acuras don't win this weekend. Next question.
Let's go for Tiger Wizard from the SCR Reddit. Tiger Wizard. It's like, I don't know, Lion Fairy. Picking
How
only
did you
one
know
drive.
my stripper name? How did you know my stripper name?
Mate, you think I'm not out there in the darkness sipping a bourbon? You're dreaming. You're dreaming. Impressive thong, by the way. Picking only one driver from each current GTLM team, Corvette, Porsche, Ford and BMW assembled the strongest four-man driver lineup for a 24-hour race. Would love to hear both Graham and Stephen's dream team. Well, you're not going to hear it from Stephen. He'll be there sipping a cup of tea.
I see how it is, man.
Yeah, he's
I step away for 2 weeks. Was there some guy with a weird non-English accent that used to be on the show? I don't know, but
never
forget that jackwad. I see how it is. All right, there.
So what do you want to go? How do you want to do this? You want to go for two and I'll go for two? I'm going to go for Corvette, and I'm going to say Garcia.
The Spanish Superman. Yeah, all right. So if that's your first pick, okay, you've taken one of my top considerations off the board. Where would I go? I love hate questions like this because there are so few wrong answers. I will, for number 2 in the combined Goodwin, Pruett, Motorsports, GTLM, Goodyear, Failure, Enterprise Incorporated, I will go with Richard Westbrook.
Ooh.
Angry. Just, he drives with anger.
He is massively angry.
And he's mouthy, too. He's lippy. I just love arguing with Westy. It's so much fun.
I'm going to go for a Porsche driver, and this one's a tough one because they have got some superstars there.
Yeah, they've kind of sucked this year though in IMSA. I mean, 0 wins, no podiums. I almost forget they're there.
I'm going to go for. It's a tough one.
I'm staring at one who is their version of Westy.
Well, it's Tandy. is that one, or they've got or Lawrence Vansor, who's just plain nuts. But I'm going to go for Bamba.
Yeah, that was actually my thought. I mean, Tandy, I guess, is the literal direct equivalent of Westy, but I was going to say Bamber as well, because while it's big smiles and he's so much fun and he's a Kiwi, and who couldn't love a Kiwi, that guy gets nasty behind the wheel. So that's a great call. All right, we got pick number 4. How are we gonna close this out? So we've chosen someone from Corvette Racing, Ford Chip Ganassi Racing, and the Porsche GT team. By the way, this maybe actually is a little bit of a hashtag breaking exclusive scoop, but don't hold me to it entirely because it always fluctuates and changes. But just before we started recording, was on a phone call with someone who would absolutely know, who says it would appear the post-Le Mans, we got to keep going. We really, really need to keep the Ford GT effort on track next year in IMSA. Initiative being pushed from the highest levels of Ford. It would appear that might have come to an end. So,
oh dear.
Yeah, so that bums me out. But let's see. So since we're not being democratic in our choices, we just have chosen from 3 of the 4 full-time teams so far. I don't know if I should just automatically go to BMW Team RLL, but I think I'd be dumb if I didn't. I love me some John Edwards. There's a question later about underrated drivers, and good old John Edwards is someone who I believe I've mentioned before here on the show, Graham. We should be talking about John now celebrating his 10th season as an IndyCar driver. He's that good. I'm happy he has employment and long-term employment in sports cars, but his is the kind of talent that could be he should have 10, 15 IndyCar wins to his credit by now. That's the kind of talent he has to play with. So I'll go with good old Johnny E.
Okay, that's your 4. We've Randy Rando Magnum. That's a stripper name.
No, that's a porn name. That's not a stripper name. That's a porn
absolutely.
name.
Goes down the road of will the 2020 schedule be announced and released this weekend? I think the answer to that one we've already come to.
That would be Friday. Absolutely.
Which would be Friday. Then we get to Craig Johnson on Facebook. Hello, gents. I wouldn't go that far. This may be a completely biased question due to my close proximity and love for Road America. When it comes to determining the length of a race, who does that? Is it the series, the promoter, the track, all of the above? Love seeing the sports cars race around Road America. I think it'd be awesome to see a 4 to 6 hour race there. Hashtag me personally.
Hashtag me personally too, Craig. This is the one event, Graham, in North American sports car racing that on a regular basis, folks ask for it to be extended. I mean, I can't think of any other race, truly, where IMSA attends or will challenge. Road America, IMSA. That combination is the one where, out of all of them, it's the only one where folks routinely say, come on, man, 4 hour minimum, if not 6. And there's precedent from the past. So some folks might have grown up seeing that and loved it and want it back. But yeah, it's the kind of place where you just don't want to leave. You want it to keep going on and on and on and on. So I totally get that. Coming back to your question, Craig, ultimately that is the series. That is the series that determines that. They can't just simply mandate that or dictate that to the tracks. Every track obviously needs to agree. They own a number of the tracks that they compete at each year, so that makes it easy. But when it comes to an independent entity like Road America, Graham, that is certainly something where IMSA and the track's leadership agree on the duration, but IMSA is also coming there saying, hey, we're doing 10 rounds. We are doing 4 endurance races. Sebring is one. Daytona's another. Road Atlanta's another. And Watkins Glen is the 4th and final. There you go. So until the day where Watkins Glen falls off of the map or otherwise, honestly, Craig, I can't see it. I know I want to see it, but I don't think we're going to see it anytime soon.
Okay. Adam Van from USCR Reddit page says, so why is the Porsche camp constantly changing its driver lineups in GTT rather? Park Place, FAF have had different driver pairings and on occasion even shared drivers, such as Detroit. Now with Wright back for 2 races, they've got a different driver lineup for both events, with a swap between them and FAF, Ralston, Campbell. Am I missing something? Why is this happening?
Adam, I would wind back to the opening question on IMSA, that being from Texan Dan, on why does Audi seem to do so much better in series other than IMSA. This is a direct result of Porsche being massively engaged with its customer teams and making sure that if super high quality drivers are needed, that they are certainly made available. So if we look at FAF winning the last race, Scott Hargrove, who I rate and very highly, was not in the car. We look at the definite involvement of young Mr. Olsen helping the team to earn its first victory alongside Zachary Robichon. So, yeah, not a surprise here, but that's not a surprise because it's been Porsche's practice for a while, Graham, of, look, we've got a lot of really great drivers under contract. And, hey, trust me, if you need them, if you've got someone busy, you got whatever it is, we can make this happen as part of an incentive to be a part of our motorsports family. I'm not saying those drivers show up for free, Adam. I'm not saying that they don't cost the teams money, but yeah, that to me is something where from the outside it might look like a constant shuffling and inconsistency. To me, I think it's a pretty amazing value add that teams can tap into. And obviously, if we look at again how the most recent round went, it's a pretty darn smart thing on behalf of FAF.
Time for Weck Aslam's Elms Echo. I think that switches the roles from me as the tormentor to me as, well, what would you call it? It's obviously the font of all knowledge.
Is Hormentor?
Well, maybe that. Maybe the font of as much knowledge as we have available this week. I think would be the way I go for it. But that doesn't quite fit in a business card.
All right. Well, we are roughly 30-ish minutes into the show. Yep. We are going to spend an additional 60 minutes getting through as many Weck, Aslam, Elms, Eco questions, and also lots of good general questions. General and fun questions. So now we turn into me talk words out of my mouth to you. We're going to go with a grumpy guy in a bear suit. Might be the best name ever on social media. Daruslar, who says, what are the chances, Graham, of SMP re-entering their BR1 chassis now that a very favorable, quote, EOT has been released?
Yeah, I bet there's some people at WEC feeling pretty dumb about this one because the answer, I think, is no. I think there are chances we will see perhaps a couple of those cars very late this season. But that might be quite interesting because that's going to require SMP Racing paying the fines for all of the races they don't appear at. So you're not allowed to enter by the rules a one-off race. So either you pay the fines for all the races or you don't get to come out and play. And if they've withdrawn from the championship, they don't get to come out and play. Therefore, their only opportunity would be at Le Mans, effectively with a wild card. So the answer pretty firmly I've had is no. The fact that a couple of their drivers appeared testing the Ginettas at the Barcelona Prologue tends to underline that. So I think, unfortunately, the now fully matured and remarkably rapid BR1, I think, as far as a full season is concerned, or anything like a full season, that be done, which, that does leave the question open. Why on earth did the WC not see that coming and release the EOT that we've now had, which you're right is a significant change, earlier, and save the possibility of a bigger LMP1 grid? Big miss.
Yeah, at Safe Phil asks a very similar question too. I think, interestingly, Graham, while this has certainly played to a very unquestionable negative regarding SMP, which has been a very committed team/sponsor, just entity in general, high investment in the WEC, we've definitely seen the WEC folks, I think, try and heavily embrace Ginetta. And with their LMP1 car, and I'm not saying that the heavy recent embrace of Ginetta through promotions, whatever else, has been in reaction to losing SMP, just does stand out to me as odd that, boy, you sure got the equivalent of a fart in church on how you handled the performance stuff that led SMP to say, nope, we're done. And yet, with Ginetta truly embracing, wanting to come back, working very hard to find a customer base, there's seemingly been the opposite reaction from the WEC of, hey, look, okay, they want to be here, cool, let's now shower a bit of favor on them. So just odd handling, for non-linear handling, for sure. Let's go to Dan Fly. Awesome name, by the way, Dan. I'm a fan of the Gibson engine. How much detail is available on how the contracts work, how they flow from factory to team to race, back to the factory for rebuild, track and event personnel support, lifespan, etc. Thanks for making so much information available to the average fans. So that closing sentence sure as heck sets us up to fail massively on this one, and I'm so thankful you're answering this one and not me.
Right. Well, okay. Let me tell you. I'm taking it we're talking here about the Gibson 4.2 litre, the GK 4.428, which is the 4.2 litre.
Numbers and letters. This is good.
So GK 428, 4.2 litre, 8-cylinder engine, which is, of course, the spec LMP2 motor for the LMP2 class.
Hey, Dan, I think he's on a Wikipedia page, but just we'll let him go.
There's about 30 LMP2 cars equipped with that engine around the world, in ELMS, in the WEC, for that matter, in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, and later this year, of course, in Asia Le Mans for the first time. There are a pool of 50 engines. That's all she wrote. That's what we've got available for those 30. And the way it works is that you pay money for the mileage on those engines, mileage and hours, if you like, on those engines. So you buy in blocks of X kilometers on those engines, or on X hours on those engines. And it's then up to Gibson, in concert with the team, to determine whether or not you keep one engine for that contract, or whether or not that engine is a point in its cycle that needs to go back to Repton in Derbyshire in the UK and be rebuilt. So you will always, against that contract, have an engine well within the hours, but it might be that you're buying basically time on two engines, and that is swapped midway through that cycle. So that is the way it works. The contract that Gibson put together with the ACO to service that worked that one through. You might remember that they increased the number of engines that they were going to build to accommodate what was at that time a burgeoning number of LMP2s. As to how many more P2 cars could be added to the mix before that pool went up from 50, that is a good question. Not one I'm fully aware of, but I don't think it could be very many more than where we are if you think about the logistics involved. And particularly when we get to Le Mans, where there are a remarkable number of spare engines. A very large proportion, by the way, of the available Gibson LMP2 engines were at Le Mans this year, with spares available for just about every team.
And that was Gibson spokesperson Graham Goodwin. Good Lord. Someone did their homework. I love it. I love it. Let's go to Kevin Payne, who says when Stephen K22, have no idea who that is, interviewed Vincent Beaumenil at the Prologue, they referred to the 2020 regulations being published. Kevin says, I can't find them on the FIA website. Should I be looking somewhere else?
Right. Two things to say is when he says published, he basically means published to the people that absolutely need them. When you say published on the FIA website, they are slower than the slowest race car you can possibly imagine. Think Formula E on a kind of extension lead. It's that slow. So it can be days, weeks, months before we actually get to see the regulations on the FIA website. But I'm sure that the answer is that the 2020 regs will be there and available to teams. As for 2021, dream on.
We need to get you some JB80 from our sponsor, Justice Brothers. We hear the official dailysportscar.com weekend sports cars chair still a squeaky mess.
Oddly enough, I've just moved from the squeaky chair to the non-squeaky chair, and then made the fatal error of using the squeaky chair as a footstool, and it was my feet on the squeaky chair. It's that kind of detail that just completely evades me.
We are going to spray your feet then with JB80 and make sure that they're properly lubricated, and that's the last time we're going to mention Graham Goodwin and lubrication in any episode this year.
And my feet.
Yes. Kevin also asks, did the GTE Pro teams get to use the new Michelin rubber at the Prologue?
Yes, but to a very limited degree. Initial information from a couple of them was that they would not have the Michelin rubber available to them at the Prologue, but then they did have a very limited amount. But information on how they found it, but obviously they found it on the stack of tyres were given by Michelin, but how their experiences of it was very little feedback on that. That I think is being kept very close to French chest right at the moment. So yes, they had some, not a lot. That's to do with the production schedule for Michelin. So we're going to see some interesting developments, I think, when we get to Silverstone for the opening round of the Season 8, which is the way we will be referring to them now, Season 8 of the FI World Endurance Championship.
And fine French chests they are. Our good pal Right Turn Lover asks, can LMP1 EOT/success penalties please only use weight and tank size aligned to per lap fuel allocation? He says, I would love to see the heavier and more fuel limited cars be able to present their disadvantage on the grid expressed in food and drink, which is then distributed to the fans. What do you think? You have some pull in the WEC, Graham Goodwin. I think you got one here you have to make happen.
I think that's Right Turn Lover just wanting another Toblerone to nibble on from the stands. I'm a firm fan of a very visual and certainly an easy-to-explain methodology around balance and performance and EOT. On that front, I absolutely agree with you. It's something I've tried to exert what pressure I can to make sure that when we get these changes, that it's expressed clearly as why have you made the change and what difference do you expect it to make. I think that's perfectly sensible. I'd like to see that being adopted by more and more and more race authorities that actually use balance performance methods to regulate the race cars. I think it would be good for the audience to understand it more, because at the moment, being told that 5 or 10 or 15 kilos is an absolute disaster, I'm just not having it, is the honest answer. We know roughly what kind of difference that will make, and it isn't absolutely vast. So I think a little bit more education about balance of performance and EOT would be a very good thing all round, because it stops an awful lot of negative threads from within the paddock and from outside the paddock. So time, I think that we're going to have it, fine, let's have it, let's embrace it, let's move forward on the basis that we've actually got a better level of information available to everybody concerned and everybody that's interested.
I don't know if you heard that sound in the background. It's me taking off my journalist cap and putting back on my old, rusty, dusty race engineer cap. Dear Mr. Goodwin, the addition of 15 kilos is indeed a massive difference maker in the context of endurance racing. So if we're talking a 30-minute World Challenge sprint race or similar 40-minute sprint race, less so. But when we're talking something that can add 1/10 to 2/10 per second each lap spread over hours of motor racing, that is indeed a giant restriction. So while the number might not seem high, and while the actual weight one can envision might not be that scary, in a era where variances are so small between teams and manufacturers, where every car shows up in such a high state of competitiveness, believe it or not, we're now at a point where 10 or 15 kilos can be a surprising difference maker. Can also do things in terms of influencing negatively tire wear, chassis balance, etc., etc. So it's not just the carrying around extra weight, the car being heavier, therefore slower, but also some of the other knock-on effects that can certainly make the car not super happy. So that's your little public service announcement from Northern California. Let's go to our man, Nate Detweiler, and we answered this earlier this year, but hey, we like answering things multiple times sometimes. Recently, manufacturers like Ferrari and Aston Martin have built cars. Hold on, let me put my journalist cap back on. There we go. That have been used as GT3 or GTE. Have any teams actually converted cars between those specifications?
I can think of one that most certainly has, but oddly enough, I've never raced it as a GT3 because the JMW Ferrari that won at the Le Mans 24 Hours in GTAM a couple of years ago was purchased as a GT3 car, therefore becomes the first ever GT3 car to win at Le Mans, albeit not in GT3 specification. But oddly enough, that car I don't believe has ever raced as a GT3. So, yes, I'm sure that has actually happened. The other one that most certainly has, by the way, is the test car for the GTE Aston Martin was also the test car for the GT3 Aston Martin. And the team, after testing it as a GT3, as a GTE rather, converted it to GT3 spec, put it on the truck, sent it to VLN, and put the thing on pole. So the answer is yes, that's been done.
I love it. I love it. Where should we go next as we wind down somewhat quickly on Weck Aslam Elms ACO? All right. Time to fess up, Graham. How did the Algarve Pro team find engineering one of the fastest race cars on the planet at the WC Prologue?
They did great. I mean, they did great. Sam and Stu Cox. Stu Cox has something of a public persona coming from how can we put this? His forthright way of expressing himself with the race team. It came from the documentary, the BBC documentary that follows Chris Hoy to Le Mans, and Stu made his name with a wider population with that. But I have to say, I love him to bits. He doesn't suffer fools gladly, but I have to tell you, I thought they did a stunning job. Algarve Pro were asked by the Team LNT guys simply because they were there, they had the kit, they weren't staying on otherwise for the WC Prologue, and so they provided a lot of the pit equipment for Team LNT at the Prologue, and indeed engineered one of the cars, managed one of the cars. But the reality there was, I think if I was Team LNT and Lawrence Tomlinson, I'd be listening very carefully to the feedback they were getting from a highly professional team. But they did great.
Team Lint, who wouldn't love them? We're going to go to Turbo 1028. How does the WC get GTE manufacturers, such as BMW and even Chevy, back into their series on a full-time basis? And do you think that's a thing, Graham, getting them, quote, back? Or do you think shifting to just finding new, since they've chosen to leave, and or in Chevy's case, they've never been there full time? But just curious whether you think that trying to get the old girlfriend or boyfriend back is the angle to take, or to start looking for some new love.
Don't see any evidence of them looking to get them back is the honest answer. As for getting new blood, I think there's a few options and opportunities. We've talked about it before on Twisk, whether or not that would be trying to aim GTE at some more boutique manufacturers that perhaps don't quite have the budget to do the hypercar routes. We've already heard that Brabham would like to take a look at that. Whether or not that happens is going to come down to David Brabham and his backers' business case for not the BT62, but the next car, which we've heard very little, if anything at all. So let's wait and see. Beyond that, I think the only thing you can possibly look towards is sex tapes. I think sex tapes of the team principals that they can then be bribed into coming to the WEC on the basis of otherwise being embarrassed by the public revelations of their more nefarious activities might be a successful opportunity to deal with that. But without that, I'm afraid you're down to where the industry is going. So it's sex tapes or industry.
The silence you hear is my brain trying to calibrate concepts of Jens Marquardt and Doug Feehan meeting up behind the garages at Le Mans. We're going to leave that right there. We're going to go to Grim Brother 1, who says, one of my favorite things to watch in recent years has been the rise of the Lamborghini brand in proper motorsport. Definitely agree. Spent too much time in improper motorsport. With several major milestones under their belt, what are the chances we might see them make serious attempts at overall success in either IMSA or the WC/Le Mans? Do you think the VAG, that being Volkswagen Audi Group, would ever allow them the opportunity to truly challenge for overall wins and take proper steps in building a brand legacy even further?
Watch this space. I mean, I think you know as well, they were sniffing around IndyCar as well, were they not so very long ago? Lamborghini as a brand has taken a very broad brush to their examination of potential motorsport programs. You know, in the recent past and indeed present, think of a number. GTE has certainly been on their horizons. So too is Hypercar. So too is DPI. All sorts of things could and might happen. It's, I think, simply a matter of exactly where the ball stops rolling in that roulette wheel at the point at which it's time to make a decision. If you ask me right now, I think any one of those is possible in terms of whether or not it's possible that we'll go to GTE, whether or not it's possible to go to Hypercar, but the most likely, if you ask me, MP, and you can tell me otherwise, might well be an expansion of what happens in the United States. And if you're going to do it with the overall. There will, however, be one car before we hear about that. I think the next thing we'll hear is going to be about GT2, and I cannot see that Lamborghini will stay out of the GT2 marketplace for very much longer. And in fact, there'll be something on DSC and I hope Racer as well about the manufacturers that we know are looking like they're in the next tranche, and at least one that people believe might be that isn't going to be. So Lamborghini's GT2 as part of the customer sports range. I think it's GT3, GTD, and the one make races. But beyond that, I'd be surprised if we didn't see something a bit more public about which way they're going to go in terms of their prototype aspirations.
Word on the street, Graham, and I feel fairly confident about this, is if choosing between prototype options, DPI 2.0 in 2022 in IMSA, or Hypercar in the WEC, that Lamborghini would be choosing the good old United States of America to play.
It makes sense, MP, for two reasons. It makes sense because it's a marketplace, whilst they've got GTD customers and they've got Super Trofeo customers, they're not competing for overall wins in races of profile, whereas in Europe and elsewhere, with the IGTC, and with them looking to step up to that next season with at least a factory-backed entry in IGTC plus the Spa 24 Hours, then they've got that opportunity to win with their brand on races that they can leverage. That makes perfect sense to me.
I'm going to make the executive decision to boot us right into Hegenerau. We're going to go to General, Excellent. Boys and girls, and I'm going to throw yet another one at you. Please don't duck. This comes in from our good pal, Andrew Baca, the good old Baxter, who says, Nick Leventis, do you think his retirement is authentic, or is it a bit, quote, you can't ban me, I quit?
Well, for those that don't know what this story is about, Nick's been a very silly boy. He was caught, tested positive for a couple of absolutely banned substances at the Laguna Seca 8 Hours early this year, and anabolic steroids, basically. My view has absolutely nothing to do with his racing whatsoever. I think it's to do with whatever it is to do with lifestyle, whether it's other extreme sports, whether or not it's just look, whatever it is. It's an incredibly stupid thing to do. He's not the first. He won't be the last. I sincerely hope he would be the last. And I think the 4-year ban that's come his way, number one, is completely righteous. And number two, I think the embarrassment that would come the way of him, of his family, and of his company is the reason why Nick has stepped down, and I think he's correct to do so. I sincerely hope that does not mean that we see any darling back from Striker Racing. That would be an awful way for what has been a championship-winning and big race-winning team to meet its end. I've heard nothing that indicates that is the case. Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that beyond the current season that Striker Racing can remain. But that's Nick Leventis basically saying it's a fair cop, and actually this is too embarrassing now for me to continue and make a comeback in 4 years' time. Best we call it game over.
Got a couple questions here. One from our pal Right Turn Lover again. One here from, let's see, Johnny Trotz, Johnny Schultz, about Spa 24 and professional drivers and ignoring blue flags, muppetry of full course yellows, things being spoiled with safety cars, finding the leading car. Tell us about
All
this,
sorts.
Graham. For those who, like myself, who were busy actually doing mundane things like packing to move house and did not read about it, but did not witness it, what the hell went on, my man?
Well, let's give you the context. So, record-breaking temperatures in Belgium. We saw 41 degrees. I don't think it was a real world 41 degrees, but it wasn't so short of that. So 41 degrees on the race control tower thermometer. To be broken, of course, race day, because why wouldn't it, by torrential rain at times. That meant a fairly large number of on-track incidents. They were then punctuated by full course yellows, quite often working their way into safety cars before the cars were let go. And yes, indeed, there were a couple of instances where cars were ignoring blue flags, or not, blue flags were not being shown, which held up leading cars or leading groups, etc., etc. I don't want to criticise the way in which races like that are governed from race control. I wouldn't want that job. I thought, for the most part, they kept it safe, which is frankly all that matters about the way in which you bring these things under control. I thought the red flag for 6 hours for the rain was absolutely well deployed. I was not awake, I have to tell you, when red flag came out, but everybody that I spoke to and the footage I've seen seems to indicate, if anything, it probably should have flown a little earlier. And then we can all be critical about how long it takes to get back to green flag running, but the reality was that what we didn't see was multiple cars skating off when racing resumed. So thank God for that. We didn't have major incidents directly as the cause of weather. We did have a couple of major incidents. I've been reasonably sharply critical of the number of cars that we had this year. 72, I think, started the race. I think that had a part to play at times with pretty heavy traffic and some incidents that came around there. That in itself, by the way, leads itself to these issues of blue flags, because you've got cars of more or less identical performance. Again, I've said as much as I want to say in terms of the fact that I'm not a massive fan of the way in which the pit stop cycles have been overly regulated. There's more people irritated by that in the garages and the pit lane, the paddock, than find it, a nothing. And for me, sadly, that might well be the last time I go to that race for quite some time. I just didn't enjoy it. It felt actually, MP, more like a Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona than it did a Spa 24 Hours. And by that I mean that there's an overarching need to be on the lead lap at a particular time in the race, and not before. And that takes away just a little something. I thought it was very professionally marshalled. It was very professionally governed, but I thought there were difficulties that they were handed the way of race control simply because of the weight, the number of cars that are actually out there. Oh, and by the way, before we get into it, because I'm sure there's a question somewhere, yes, the balance of performance of the Bentleys was absolute bullshit. At no point did they look anything close to being able to get onto terms with the leading 20 or so cars. And there's got to be something wrong when you've got a major mark like that putting in 4-car entry and there is just no pace. That was wrong.
Yeah, idiots. Let's go to Mark Usher, who asks, just like to know your thoughts on the revival of GT2 and now apparently the revival of GT1.
Right, okay. Well, let's deal with GT1 first. This came my way in a conversation with a couple of team owners down in the paddock. Oh, have you heard? We're going to get GT1 coming back, sit above GT2. Only... Not quite. So what the GT1 is it's basically something of an expansion of something that already exists. Effectively, it's the hypercar club. This is owners of the real top-end hypercar road cars having the opportunity to come and be entertained, perhaps show off a little, maybe a little bit of competitive lappery, whether that's like a time attack or whether or not that's a no-contact race. But the reality is that ain't GT1 by anybody's reckoning. That is LaFerraris, that is 918 Spiders going out there And, there's a place for that. We'd all like to see those cars out there, and there's a possibility of seeing them driven quickly. Yes, but they will not be racing. GT2 is something altogether different, and that project is beginning to crystallize now. And what that means is that it will become the AM class iteration for SRO's global platform. So the first way in which it'll be seen, there's been some changes in the way that will be seen. We're not going to see a GT2 class, for instance, the British GT Championship, which was originally slated for. Instead, it will go into the Blancpain Sports Club. What is that, you may ask? Well, that sits below what used to be the Blancpain Endurance Blancpain Sprint Series in Europe, and is effectively for amateur-only ranked drivers. At this point, it's had a real mix of new and old GT3 cars in it. GT2 cars will be coming there. They'll also be coming to new sports clubs products to support the SRO race packages both in North America and in Asia. So the Blancpain Sports Club, or whatever it's going to be called, the sports club, because Blancpain has not yet, by the way, signed its full-year deal for 2020 with SRO. That will be a product you start to see on the bill with either Blancpain, the World Challenge Asia, or World Challenge North America. You'll start to see some GT2 cars there. We've already seen the Porsches. They had their first two races as a one-make race at Spa. I was privileged to be able to be handed a mic for those two races. We've seen the Audi. At least the test car will feature in another demonstration race at Barcelona later this year. We are told at Barcelona there will be another manufacturer announced, and that there are lengthy conversations. There are, conversations leading to potential product hitting the track with 3 other manufacturers for next year. I'm going to do my best to unpick exactly what that is in an article I intend to share with racing.com, dailysports.com, either later today or tomorrow.
Good man. Well, I think the next question might be one that you would foist my way.
Ooh, what's that? Oh, thoughts on the IGTC event announced for Indianapolis. So that what this one's about. This is the end of the race at Laguna Seca, which had its 2 downs and 1 up. Ryan Terpstra asks, "What's your thoughts on IGTC coming to Indy, MP?"
If you are a fan of the IGTC and have always wanted to see those cars participate on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course, please go to the inaugural event. Because I put good money that if you wait to see the return of the IGTC for year 2, you might be standing there by yourself in silence as no race cars go around the circuit. It's not going to last unless the IGTC want to spend money, unless there is money being spent and the circuit is being paid simply to host the event year after year. It will generate no crowd. It will generate no interest. It's going to be a non-event. I wish the opposite was true. I just know that with an American product that was, by comparison, very well known, being Grand Am, no one turned up to the Brickyard to watch sporty cars go around. It's a non-entity in central Indiana. Will there be some diehards? Of course. But we are talking if they sell more than 2,000 tickets for the event, Graham, I will be shocked. Not going to say I'm going to eat my hat or otherwise, but it's not going to happen. So I'm happy for the folks who want to compete there. Happy for the folks who really want to see those cars there. It's not a market that's going to work. If it was going to work, it would have worked here in the greater San Francisco Bay Area at Laguna Seca. It didn't. So, again, love the idea. I'm happy for the circuit that they are being paid to host a motor racing event. Make no mistake, this is not the Indianapolis Motor Speedway paying to have the IGTC. So I'm happy that Indy is being rented for a sports car race. just not a venue that is going to draw a crowd. If this were, Graham, Mid-Ohio, I think we would be having a different conversation. I think that they're, and that's a 4-hour drive, I think. 3.5 or so hour drive last time I did it. It's not that far away, but if you were to go 3.5, 4 hours east to Mid-Ohio, I think you might actually draw a decent crowd, but not at the home of the Indianapolis 500, unfortunately. Let me see, what else can I grab? I was going to say on you, but
should say by the way, Damien Peachman and others have also asked similar questions. You've answered those beautifully already. It's one of the prevailing questions this week, together with all sorts of other questions about Spa and GT2. And by the way, Johnny Schultz said, no, I don't believe that it'll be Ferrari. That Jean-Eric Slusen casually mentioned the third GT2 manufacturer will be Ferrari. Can I confirm that? No, I don't. I've got 4 manufacturers in mind, and Ferrari on that list at the moment.
Let's see. I'm trying to think of some other generals we should grab before closing out with fun, because we got lots of generals.
Nice one here by Neil Hardy, by the way. If climate change doommongers are right, extreme weather events are becoming more common. I can tell you from my experience this year racing, they're down. They absolutely got it straight. I've been to one circuit twice this season, that being Spa. We've had snow, hail, high winds, extreme temperatures approaching 40 degrees, and then torrential rain. Yeah, extreme weather events. But the question is, what can endurance racing do to protect itself more against more disruption from extreme heat, torrential rain, or snow in May? I
can't really. I mean, I wouldn't apply this to endurance racing because although it might feel like it at times, it's not a form of sport that in particular gets attacked by adverse weather, but it's a brilliant question. There's no such thing to me as climate denier. Well, they do exist, but there's no such reality as denying reality. If temperatures are being shown to rise and we are seeing some of the knock-on effects of that, then it is certainly a thing. It's just an evolution, regardless of whether it's man-made or not. Again, none of this. I also love the fact, little 10-second rant, bring up something like climate change and folks start talking about politics. I don't want to talk politics. It's not politics. It's science. We are dealing, though, it would appear, Graham, with more extreme events, just stupid heat at times where you go, okay, it's normally hot, but boy, it's really hot. Or why is rain or snow falling in my head at this time of the year when it doesn't happen? It does seem like that's been more of a thing in recent years. I don't honestly have a great answer other than if that becomes a trend on the engineering side, obviously the folks that name all the various tire brands would be looking at year-to-year data and seeing that, boy, if we go to this track at this time traditionally in this month each year, and we're looking at the ambient, and it is indeed increasing year by year, then I'm sure that would change, Neil, in terms of tire compound and construction to try and combat such things. I don't know if any major changes would need to happen on the wet side in terms of rains. I mean, most tire brands have a pretty solid understanding as to how to make really excellent tires that either handle intermediate, semi-rain, but not crazy, all the way to really crazy monsoon-style stuff. So that, to me, is really the only major thing that stands out. If we are seeing, though, Graham, the likelihood of hotter events being more prevalent, I would say that could potentially be something where manufacturers, if we're talking sports car racing specifically, and so many vehicles that are homologated, could that lead to some manufacturers looking to redesign bodywork, change the sizing on oil and water radiators and such from a cooling standpoint? I mean, these are just some of the practical things that come to mind on if this is a trend we're heading in and it's only getting, quote, worse, there would absolutely be some things that would have to change to adapt in the event of that being a more frequent reality.
Well, here's one. It just occurs to me. You might remember from COTA a couple of 3 years ago, MP, with a company that Aston Martin Racing had a partnership with for a short while, where they had these very thin solar panels on the roof of the car. That could be something whereby that helps in terms of the driver cooling, for instance. If you need it, it kicks in when you've got the need for it. And, with the way that solar panels development has actually gone, the weight penalty of that now is remarkably less than it used to be. So lots of things that could come into it, and I think might well come into it, because it certainly is a challenge with this one. We are seeing more and more races interrupted for much longer now for extreme weather. Heavy rain, and for that matter, when we get to extreme heat, that causes major problems in terms of the physical demands on drivers, and for that matter, the rest of the crews in an endurance race. So let's watch this space for it. I agree with you completely, by the way. Not politics, science, and reality. Let's
blinded us with politics. No, that was the song. Would also just say, Graham, that could there also be a market for somewhat altered racing seats that are not only waterproof but somewhat bathtub-esque, right? The heck with cool suits and air conditioning. Let's throw some ice and a couple gallons of water into the seat and just let the driver kind of sit there in a little, have his little swim floaties on, or her little swim floaties on. Just trying to think of ways we can combat things and throwing the stupid ideas that fall into my head as ideas. All right, where else should we go, my friend, in general?
McLaren GT3 sales strategy from Justin at JTruck71 on Twitter, with 0 cars at the Spa 24, 0 cars in the Blancpain European Series, and only 1 impartial IMSA season. Does anyone understand McLaren's strategy for the 720S? Seems like the best way to sell them would be visible and competitive. Is it McLaren's lack of support for customer teams? It's a brand new car, I think, is what we need to say there. Actually bumped into very senior member of McLaren customer racing at Spa very briefly. They don't seem terribly concerned. I do expect it to be a high-profile entry for McLaren into Blancpain next year. I'd be quite surprised if we didn't see rather more of those cars around. Have had some bad news that we've lost the 2 cars that would have taken part in the Suzuka 10 Hours, with Kazumichi Go's McLaren Customer Racing Japan team pulling out. But I think there's some growing pains with that organisation. Remember, this is a nascent organisation after the unpleasantness between the previous McLaren GT operation, the CRS run operation, taking that back in-house. Lots of cars have been built. Over 100 GT4 570S cars have been built, and certainly into double figures for the GT3 cars. And it's going to take some time, some effort, some investment to provide the level of support that means that you can build the confidence of people in those cars. They're not without success. They are doing pretty well in some of the championships that we see them in. It may not always be the ones that you've got your focus on. British GT has got a car, 3, and race-winning form in the International GT Open in Europe. Should have been 2. We will have 1 in Suzuka, 1 in Blancpain Asia, 1 in the Australian GT Championship. But remember, this is customer racing, and before you can start to really invest in putting factory money behind it, you've got to have an income stream to do that with, and that might just be the growing pains they're going through.
Definitely wonder, Graham, if McLaren is in need making bigger overtures in sports car racing with the new model, owing to everything you mentioned as well, with a bit of personnel change. And there's been things in a very general sense that I would say, if I was a potential customer looking at the landscape, obviously know that McLaren has had great success, has had their models well represented. Not this year, obviously, as we've just covered, but they have had a significant role in customer-based GT racing. Just wonder, though, if a lot of the, I don't know if I should say wandering eye, but we're in Formula One. We're also looking at IndyCar. Hey, hypercar could be a thing. Hey, speedboat racing. Who knows? Part of me wonders if, in a very specific market where folks in sports car racing, specifically GT customer-based competition, folks are really looking for a manufacturer that is going to come across as fully embedded, fully invested. Sure, we might do other things, but guess what? You are our hardcore focus, I wonder if there's a feeling that has waned. Therefore, we're seeing the lack of uptake on the new things that are happening here model-wise, and also whether the brand would be smart to come up with some sort of winning the hearts and minds and securing any feelings within the global customer GT audience that, nope, we're here, we're all about you, who cares what else we're doing, we're 100% focused on you.
Well, they'll surely know the answer to that, MP. They'll surely know the answer to that. That will be coming back to them, believe me, very directly indeed, face-to-face. And they do an awful lot of face-to-face. I see the same top brass that I see from McLaren at Spa all over the world, bumping into all sorts of paddocks as they look into all sorts of potential customer programs and factory programs. So by now they'll know the answer to that question, and they'll know, therefore, where they've got to invest their time, their personnel, and therefore their financial resource. Their choice now. If there are crises, if there are challenges, they've got to rise to that or suffer the market consequences.
Take one more here from General, then we will close the show with 10 or 15 minutes of fun. This comes in from Kiwi Chris, who says some nice things about having me back. Thank you, sir. Says, question, I've always wondered how TV commentators deal with race interruptions. Graham, you've had to do it at Spa and Fuji with the WEC. The comms team had to do it this past weekend. Is there a list of pre-prepared topics you work through, or do you just wing it? Should we reveal the randomness here, or should we play it off like, oh boy, months of research for topics to draw from?
I bring a ring binder with me every time. It's carefully scripted. I'm only allowed to say the same phrase in response to Martin Haven's regular rants. Alan McNish will normally just take about an hour off and go and eat repeated tonics, tea cakes in the back of the booth while we struggle. No, of course. It genuinely, you come back and you draw on your knowledge, you draw on your ability to hold a conversation together. Of course, if it's one of the races where we are permitted to interact with fans via the various means that we do with Twisk, then we'll do that. And, that's certainly been kind of prevalent before. I thought the guys that were on overnight, Martin Haven again, oddly enough, Moran actually making his European debut in pit lane in very challenging conditions, did a brilliant job in in tracking down whoever was still awake while we were under that 6 hours of red flag. It's tough, but actually, if you enjoy the company of the people you work with, and I'm lucky enough for the most part that I do, that it's not that tough. I think you're going to see some changes as things are going to move forward, certainly in terms of the way the WEC presents itself in those kind of circumstances, should they come again. I think you are going to find that there's going to be rather more signposted talking points. In other words, here are the major points coming into this race and through this race. We'll be, I think, better prepared. There was some great stuff that came out of the broadcast at Le Mans with the wider team we actually had there, and there's been some lessons learned. And in fact, I'm doing some work on some of that storyboarding right now. Not to say we won't be talking about what you're seeing and what we expect you're going to see, but we're hoping to add a little bit more structure about it. But as for red flag, absolutely, that is, generally speaking, you wing it because we don't know any more than you do how long it's going to be. It might be 15 minutes, it might be 15 hours. And 6 hours for the Spa 24 hours, that's a big challenge. That's a big challenge to fill, particularly in the middle of the night.
Another thing too here, Chris, is you also have your producers in your ear that might be suggesting things. Not necessarily here's something to talk about, but hey, by the way, 2 years ago, we had a similar red flag for a thing. You guys might touch on that. Another thing that would happen as well is you could either have a producer say, hey, we have a package ready to show or to talk about, or you might say, hey, while we're down here for a little while, maybe we can pull up a graphic that says this, or here's some other topic that I want to hit. Can someone go find that and pull that to run? But the real answer here, Chris, as Graham mentioned, a lot of it's just pulling stuff out of your backside. And again, that's kind of the essence of what we do. That'd be a great business card. Marshall Pruett, I pull things out of my backside. What we do often is just try and take experience and opinions and use them, shape them somehow, both when the action is happening and off, when we're under yellow, red, or whatever it might be. And the last thing that comes to mind, just to add here, Graham, is chemistry. It gets hard when you step into a booth with people you don't know, and you finally have to wing it for a while. But it certainly helps when you walk in with the lovingly insane Martin Haven and the very particular and highly comedic Alan McNish. It's going to be fun. If anything, you're kind of hoping for a red flag to see what you crazies come up with. So, yeah, it's really easy when you walk in and know the people, and especially if you have either some shared history or you've been in the sport together for a while, even not if you don't know one another, at least you can draw back to a point in time or something. Just makes life a lot easier. So, at least as I've found, those tend to be the broadcast teams that you remember and love because they do some really fun stuff. So, all right, we're going to go to fun, and we're actually going to go to fun and use the last question that had been separated into general as the start of fun. Oh, this comes from Bonnelas 47.
Hey, Bonnelas.
During one of the ordinary F1 subreddits pissing matches, one of the participants claimed, F1 drivers are the most intelligent of all athletes. This is the best. This has me wondering if motorsport drivers are particularly intelligent among athletes.
Oh, I'm biting my tongue so hard.
Let's see, Bonnie. I can tell you this, from the American side at least. There's not always an expectation of intelligence, critical thinking, world awareness, etc., with motor racing drivers, mechanics, you name it. And I've been a mechanic who was a bit of a Luddite as well. The drivers that I tend to enjoy the most often are ones who look up from the steering wheel and see the world around them and absorb some of it so they can do more than just talk about race cars. But I would say, having played many sports growing up and knowing a lot of people who are very good athletes, I would not paint Formula One drivers as the most intelligent of all athletes, much less the most intelligent among motor racing drivers. Not by any stretch. I would probably, and this is perfect for the show, probably hand that off to the general world of sports car racing, owing to the fact that, since it is often a pro-am dynamic, many of the AMs are businessmen or women, have higher forms of education, things that would allow them to be successful in life, to therefore play. Obviously, there are some who are members of the Lucky Sperm Club who get to spend money that their mothers or fathers made or inherited, but I would just say, by the numbers, there are more folks who are, whether it's a neurosurgeon, someone who started some major business and that's thrived and such. We're going to have more of those people driving sports cars than any other form of racing I can think of. So I think our little world here would happen to win that argument among drivers. What says you, Mr. Goodwin?
It's a hilarious question for starters. I think that let's kind of hold the candle for our part of the sport. I think there is a reality that in sports car racing, endurance racing, you are managing more parameters very often than perhaps a single-seater driver, an F1 driver is, including not being selfish. That's a massive intellectual challenge as to how do you compromise in that way. It's a great example, by the way, for politics at the moment, the power of compromise and the benefits of compromise. Are race drivers more intelligent than other athletes? Well, I've had a bit of good fortune to meet a fair number of athletes in other sports through previous professional careers, and I think there's good and bad in all of it. One of the ones that, when you read these questions, sometimes individuals come to mind. The individual that came to mind when I was thinking about this one is a guy who actually raced at the weekend and has done quite a bit of racing since his main career finished. That's Chris Hoy, one of our most successful Olympic athletes, massively accomplished cyclist. When Chris started racing after his Olympic career finished, his thighs were 27 inches, each of them. His first race car had to be redesigned to fit his legs in it But what I'd say about Chris is intellectual, well, not in the traditional form, but certainly a thinker, certainly someone who's actually got it going on in terms of being able to think his way through a technical, psychological problem and deliver on that. And that's what I find impressive, is that people can achieve in more than one area of life. And quite often, certainly some of the guys, maybe not the very top end of Formula One, they're where they wanted to be for the whole of their adult life. They're exactly where they want to be. To get there, sometimes they've had to kick and scrape and grind away at whatever the challenge is to get there. And that's admirable if it's not just money that's handed to them. But it doesn't make them intelligent. It doesn't make them a towering intellect. For me, the ones that are impressive are the ones that are successful in more than one area of life. And that doesn't have to be sporting achievements and business acumen. It can be actually show that they get it, that there are other things in life to athletic achievements and gathering, cubic yardage of money. They're the ones I find are the more impressive individuals.
Yeah, dummies.
Yeah.
I think folks have said that to me many times. All right, where should we go in the 10 minutes or so we're going to grant ourselves for additional FUN fun?
Let's go with Ryan Terpster's question here. The quick one: which Top Gear presenter would you be? For anyone on the podcast this week, including new presenters this year, if you're a Top Gear presenter, which one would you be? Marshall Pruett.
I fear I'd be James May. I
Me as well.
fear I'd be James May. Granted, my hair's fallen off the top of my head pretty quickly, so I might need a wig, but yeah, I fear I might be him.
I will tell you right now, Ryan, I'm not a massive fan of where that went with the three idiots, as I would normally refer to them as, but I feel that's unfair on James May. I think he's actually a very, very good broadcaster. And the way that I would actually account for it is this: if you look at the three of them, all three of them have done other broadcasting, and actually Jeremy Clarkson was certainly capable, before his ego reached the towering size that it now is, capable of holding together a very good broadcast by himself. James May's programs, generally speaking, are very watchable by quite a wide audience. Richard Hammond, by contrast, is crap. End of.
So which one are you?
James May.
All right, well, look at that.
Well, if nothing else, the hairstyle.
All right, fair enough. Let's go to James Counter, who says, what's your favorite Wolfgang Ulrich memory or story? And also says, great to have you back, MP. Thank you, James.
Favorite memory, without a shadow of a doubt, was what happened in the moments after Peugeot's win in 2009. And what happened, and we saw that live on camera, within seconds of that actually happening, and of course wild scenes in the Peugeot garage, was that Wolfgang led the entire senior staff down from Audi Team Yost to stand in the garage doorway and simply applaud. And I thought that was the sign of a man and a team very comfortable with their place in the racing world at that stage. And there's lots of stories about Wolfgang. He's an astonishingly good company. Some extraordinary stories from his past that he's passed on privately over dinner a couple of times when I've had that privilege. I can leave those ones to come in his book, because if he doesn't write one, he's a fool. If you're listening, Wolfgang, write the book, because it's brilliant. But yeah, I just think he's a man of true class. And I thought that moment for me just defined where they were at that stage. Has he made mistakes? Has he done dumbass things? Of course he has, as a human being. You know, the push him off incident with DTM, etc. Forget it. I'd rather look at the mark of the man, which is the way that he behaved when the race that they might at that stage, MP, have regarded as their own, was finally taken away from them by their greatest competitors at the time, by Peugeot. And the way he responded there, I thought, was absolutely top-notch.
So since you've handled the Wolfgang Ulrich memory, I will throw in the unasked Ulrich Boretsky memory, Wolfgang's counterpart at Audi Sport on the engine side. And many favorite memories there. The most lasting one, though, was from the Silverstone WEC race in 2015 and the little cottage-style hotel that I was staying in happened to be the same that many of Audi's senior brass were staying in. And so by chance, I think the two of us got back at roughly the same time and went straight down to the in-hotel pub to grab some dinner. And he sat down in this table next to me about 2 minutes after I sat down. I said, come on, come have a seat, sit down, let's have dinner together. And he said, yes, but we don't talk motor racing. And I said, do you think I really want to sit here and talk to you about motor racing after spending 12 hours at the track? So my favorite memory from that, Graham and James, was learning that Mr. Boretsky and his wife routinely spend 1 week a year on vacation at a monastery where they do not speak, nor do any of the, I don't know whether we should call them monks, whatever it is, but the entire monastery is silent. And they go and spend a week there in silence with them. And it's a week of complete contemplation, not a word uttered, not just during the day, in and among others who are there doing the same thing, but even at night in private. I thought that was fascinating for someone whose career is based on creativity, thoughts, ideas, adventurous ways of making power, whether
noise,
fuel, whether it is just imagine all the things involved with being one of the world's premier manufacturers of horsepower. I thought it was fascinating that instead of trying to go to some sort of, art institute and here's ways to further open your mind and horizons and all kinds of creative juices, his place, his center was actually going, or is once a year going to a place where everything gets small. And I would imagine as a result, that's the way he has found to indeed expand thoughts and ideas, not through an abundance of external inputs, but the exact opposite. It's just fascinating to listen to him explain it.
Wow. I mean, I'll just make it a quick note to self. Must book monastery break for soon-to-be 16-year-old daughter. Okay. Done that? Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? Fascinating. And the story, by the way, that I wish I could tell, but I won't, is the accident where Wolfgang Ulrich almost lost his leg. But I won't tell that one. It's for Wolfgang to tell it, as and when he decides to. Right. How long we got?
Well, let's say 5 more minutes. 2 more questions. How's that?
Let's go for it. So in which case, let's go for James Counter.
I see one here that it ticks the mandatory aspect of every Weekend Sports Cars episode.
Bobby Unser versus Christoph Buescher. Who wins? Who curses the most? So who wins the race? I don't know, Bobby Unser. You can tell me. Christoph was quick in his day, Bobby Unser, every time, because he'd be cheating massively. Excellent.
Yeah,
come on.
Yes, he'd be cheating. Very likely to drive you off the course even more than Christoph Buescher. So Bobby Unser, I guess Buescher doesn't really tick the cheating box, but the driving like a complete a-hole, in complete oblivion, pretending as if you don't exist. Uncle Bobby was the original Buescher. If anything, Buescher is playing from the Uncle Bobby playbook. Uncle Bobby does not have or own a Hammer Emporium like Christoph Buescher happens to do. But yeah, Uncle Bobby, boy, you want to talk about someone who set the standard for this is an organized motor race. There are many vehicles in it, none of them more important than mine, none of them with a greater ability to finish first. And if you recognize that and fall in line behind me, you'll have a wonderful day with the possibility of finishing as high as second. And if you don't, you might be introduced to the safety crew and barriers and all kinds of things which you've never met before. As for who curses the most,
in fairness, I've not heard very much that way from Christoph. Christoph is the opposite of a regular race driver. Most race drivers get the hammer down. Christoph picks it up.
Very true. But the closing question here from James, who curses the most? There's actually a secondary component to it. So Bobby, well, possibly 3. You and I do not speak French fluently or enough to grasp all curse words. So indeed, Buescher could be cursing a lot and we wouldn't necessarily know it. But I can say for sure, having spent many, many unforgettable hours of my life in the presence of Uncle Bobby or on the phone with Uncle Bobby, his command of the English language and the curse words that add nothing but flavor to it without parallel. So he certainly wins that. Now, excellent. There's the final component, the unasked part here. Who is cursed at the most by fellow drivers? No. We know who that person is. That is Christophe Buescher. That is what makes the man a legend. A Le Mans winner? Who cares? The driver hated by more of his colleagues, the most hated driver among drivers, who is cursed at by his competitors? Definitely Christophe Buescher wins that award.
Excellent stuff. Beautiful question. It's nice we could all be drawn together in the same positive way.
Well, we've got 2 questions left, and I need to pose one of them to you. You know, there's 2 left. Let's do both of them because I like the last one too. Josh Ridgen, who says, are there any drivers that are considered divas? And who is considered to be the biggest diva of the lot? Ooh. Should we reveal it's Andy Lally? I mean, just Lally. I tell you. No, who would you say? Who's the biggest diva? Well, and also, how close is your closest hospital? Because we might need to prepare them for your arrival.
This Montoya, what you'll see, if you ever see Montoya without his racesuit on, you'll notice his immaculately coiffured chest hair, and it'll always part that to the left, which I think is always quite stylish. Divas, blimey. Great question.
You know who I'd throw in here who shocked me?
Go on.
Lucas Luhr.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He had a tendency to feel himself. He at least as we refer to it in sports here in the U.S., it's called big timing, right? The guy who feels himself a little too much, a little too important, big times you a little bit. Hey, you know, I'm a big star. You're a little thing here. Psh, get away, flee. Yeah, Luhr. I saw that crop up in Luhr from time to time, and I'm like, wow. I realize that you are, or maybe back then, I don't know if it's changed hands, but the winningest driver in American Le Mans Series history, and again, amazing driver. But do you really think folks here in folks in Wisconsin at the Road America ALMS race are just going to be fawning over the presence of Lucas freaking Luhr? Do you think folks even know who you are? I mean, they might, but the chances are they probably don't. And yet, you're bringing that kind of, hey, have I ever told you how great I am kind of way of being? Yeah, so, yeah, Luhr surprised me. He was super cool at times as well, but there was that thing that could come out where like, here we go, buddy. Okay. How about you? Who's your leading candidate?
Jacques Villeneuve.
Wow.
Jacques Villeneuve in sports cars. He was a pig. He was awful. Really, it didn't last long, and with good reason. But he had a bucket of attitude. When he came to drive in LMP1, an absolute bucket of it. So didn't enjoy him. Didn't enjoy Frank Montani for the same guy. But I'm not really sure now, to be honest with Frank.
I had something on my nose I had to clear there.
Well, I'm not sure whether or not the Frank Montani bit was attitude or basically the result of overindulgence in white powder now. But the reality was he was pretty unpleasant to deal with and had a bit of an attitude around him as well. And actually, of the current guys, not so much a diva, just a bit of an attitude. Stand up Jean-Luc Verne.
Don't know him. Don't really. I mean, I've interviewed him once or twice, but I don't know him enough to have. Wow.
I guess the thing with Jean-Eric is this. He can be remarkably pleasant, but quite often isn't, which means it's elective. And that's the bit I don't like, is you're choosing to be unpleasant.
I know that when I covered my first, or I think it was the first, Gold Coast 600 V8 Supercars race where they invited international motor racing stars to pair with the best V8 drivers. One of the first stories I wrote was just a reaction piece to Villeneuve and how many of the V8 drivers were just slagging him off for the exact thing. Like, it was his first day in one of the cars, and already I was hearing from multiple V8 drivers like, oh, this guy's just a twat. Like, what is, this guy is the worst. What the hell's wrong with him? So, yeah, definitely saw that, which is weird because with his coming over to the U.S., I think it was 92, where he ran in Italian Formula 3, came over and started running in the Formula Atlantic that his father used to such great effect in 93, and saw him there, watched him there, was working with a rival team in the Atlantic Series, and I think again through 94. No, I think he moved to IndyCar in 94, but regardless, while he was a little bit aloof in 93, he was certainly approachable. I had a couple of conversations with him just as one of our mechanics was French-Canadian and I think knew him a bit. So three of us would occasionally just chat or whatever. And like I said, definitely a little something there, but it wasn't bad. But to your point, whatever it was, it certainly took off and went to pretty unhappy places. Afterwards, speaking of afterwards, we're almost at the afterwards of the show, and that's because we have one question to go. Coming in from Damien Peachman. And Damien, I've taken a week or two off here, so I don't know if you sent something in while I was not tending to the show, but I'm curious if this might be your first question. And if so, thank you for sending it in. It says, Marshall, what IMSA team would you like to do a one-off Etasha livery? And Graham, what WC or ELMS team would you like to do a one-off Etasha livery? And of course, an Etasha livery is one that uses anime-style cartoons and characters and whatnot on it. And I say that because everybody knows that. And/or I looked it up last night because I didn't know what the hell it was, and I didn't want to sound like a total idiot.
This comes on the back of the three-car Mercedes-AMG efforts with Black Falcon team at the Spa 24 Hours, and boy, did they look great. And I was a very popular daddy when I brought back the poster from that for my manga and anime-obsessed young lady.
Did you say MAGA? Wow.
Manga,
it's even,
manga.
I mean, I knew Brexit, but MAGA? Really? Boris Johnson's gotten you already?
What, Make America Nearly Great Again? That one.
Jesus. Wow. All right there, pal.
But what team would I have in the... I want to see some Yorkshire manga on the Ginettas. Flat cap and cup of tea and misery. That's what I want to see, but it'd have to be grey. It would have to be a grey manga. It would be, I don't know, making Northallerton great again.
I love it. Damien, I believe there's only one answer to this in IMSA. I mean, clearly, there's not even a remote second. It's Corvette racing. I mean, the irony here, and we would have to do the cars in pink, because the most American cars in IMSA, big, bellowing, rough, gruff, front engine still, thankfully, just earth-shattering, earth-shaking, rumbling GT cars. Naturally, they'd need to be pink, featuring some kind of Etasha livery. I think it would be the most hilarious thing. I think there would be folks threatening to kill themselves trackside, having shown up with their big Corvette racing banners and pounding beers and, punching cattle and wearing cowboy hats and what? So I think that'd be high comedy. Just people wondering what happened. Did someone take over the Corvettes? Has this team been held hostage and they refuse to change the livery until the ransom is paid? I think this would be the best thing ever.
What about pink? Okay, with anime versions of each of the Corvette drivers feminized, and they turn up to race with heavy makeup, false eyelashes, etc., and we can rename it Hello Pretty. That'd be lovely.
The name's perfect. I think you're revealing a little bit too much here, because there wouldn't have to be a lot of wardrobe change compared to how some of them turn up. Not looking at you, Oliver Gavin, but hey, that's a tall drink of water there and heels.
It's Olivier Weekends, by the way.
Oh boy. All right. I think we have thoroughly and authoritatively embarrassed ourselves. Maybe we should stop the stupidity.
I think so.
Do you think we should just say thank you at this point for those who persevered, those that have whatever persecution complex where they felt like they needed to have something just bad and be blamed and feel like they were doing some sort of penance involved? I'm not sure, but I do think we should say thank you at least. And we should say thank you to our partners as well.
We should say thank you to Cooper Tires and to the fabulous people at Justice Brothers. And one other thing, it's great to have you back, buddy. I know there's some challenges still ahead, but it's nice to hear your voice and wish you all the best with what's coming next. And I know the listeners have been writing on social media and in the questions for weeks and weeks with so much good wishes and so much love for yourself and Cabral. And I want to echo it right here, right now.
Well, that's very kind of you. And there's no need to get serious to close the show, you silly person. And you know what? We also need to make sure that we incorporate young Mr. Kilby from time to time as well. So he's not just the emergency fill-in, but you know, maybe there's a time where you, having been punched by Jacques Villeneuve after hearing that you called him out as being Polly Prissy Pants and are getting, you know, your black eye taped up, you know, maybe we could have Stephen on here from time to time.
I will be at the Suzuka 10 Hours in a couple of weeks' time, and indeed on vacation next week. So we could see what opportunities present themselves there. I have every intention of being contactable, but you know what? He did a great job for a young lad.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. He did a job. I wouldn't put great on it, but you know, the question. Let's leave our listeners with this question on the Weekend Sports Cars podcast, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. If Graham were to take a week off and Stephen were to slot into that seat, what would be the appropriate rate to charge him? $100? $200? Just trying to find out, you know? Because, look, I wouldn't pay him, but I'm just so, you know, maybe we need... He thinks this stuff gets offered like he deserves it. No, honestly... So many people turn down the opportunity to fill in for me. We never told him that part. He's the only dumb one who said yes. So anyways, we just don't want him to think that he's favored status. Yeah, totally. So let's just, with you, dear listeners, giving us some advice, how much should we charge him? Granted, you're the one who pays him, so it's kind of, I guess in theory, you know, it's still kind of a loop there, but... Anyways, I
did try to sell it as a branding opportunity. He wasn't having anything of it. But with the challenges he's got in terms of his looks, you know, his football preferences, all of those, despite that, he did manage to get words out, which I thought was impressive for a lad of age.
Either $250 to co-host the show or tattooing the Twisk logo or just a hashtag tattoo me personally somewhere on his body. I think those are currencies I'd be willing to work with here. I'm not sure which direction we should go, but again, dear listener, tell us, give us a dollar amount Kilby should pay to be on, or what kind of hashtag breaking exclusive scoop tattoo he might need to have imprinted on his body in perpetuity to gain access to the show. These are the burning questions.
Right, mate, that's enough of this nonsense. Good luck with the move. Good luck with everything. And I hope it'll be next week rather than a fee-paying Stephen Kilby to co-host the Weekend Sports Cars. What's next? Well, I'll tell you what, we've got IMSA this weekend.
We do. We have IMSA. We have Friday's State of the Series, schedule release, some news on categories and competition. And then we have a motor race to talk about as well. And it tends to produce a corker. So going to look forward to next week's episode. In the time between now and that episode, the SRO could announce the formation of GT0 because we're starting to run out of numbers, but they seem to have a new class each week. So who knows? Not sure what's going to come next week, but looking forward to hosting it with you, my British brother, Graham Goodwin, here on the good old Marshall Pruett podcast, named after myself because I have a giant raging ego and I need to defeat Christoph Buescher in that category. We'll speak to you next week.
Excellent.